Guys, it's finally time for the greatest event on the scientific calendar, the Ig Nobels. You may be aware of the Nobel Prize, which is prestigious, yes, but boring. The Ig Nobels, though, are prestigious and a lot of fun. The Ig Nobels are the brainchild of Mark Abrams, who also edits the Annals of Improbable Research. Starting in the 1990s, Mark awarded Ig Nobels to research that makes people laugh and then makes them think. My first Ig Nobel ceremony that I attended was in 2007, where one prize went to a researcher who discovered that Viagra can cure jet lag in hamsters. I'm just going to leave that sentence out there. If you want to know more, you can head to patreon.com/Rebecca or find the link in the description box to the transcript where I list all the sources, and you can learn all about that. After that ceremony, fun fact, I met up with other local critical thinkers and readers of my blog Skepchick, and together we launched Boston Skeptics in the Pub. And Mark Abrams, I think, was our first speaker. So yeah, I have a real soft spot in my heart for the Ig Nobels, and I did look forward to them every year. They stopped live events during COVID, but this year they are back and the honorees are as great as ever. Remember back in 2021 when I made a video about how some mammals can breathe through their buttholes and research suggests that that might be a way to give humans oxygen? Well, the team that conducted that study just won the 2024 Ig Nobel Prize for Physiology. Congratulations. The Botany Prize this year went to a study I mentioned in a past Patreon-only newsletter, which I do every Friday for $5 plus members, in which two guys tested the mimicking ability of a particular plant by showing that it can even mimic an artificial plant. Though, as I mentioned in that newsletter, it's not the best study. More research definitely needs to be done on that one, but it is interesting. But there were a few studies noted in this year's ceremony that I wasn't familiar with, so I'm very glad that my friend Drew Curtis of Fark.com tipped me off to the winner of the Demography Prize, which involved a study on so-called blue zones. First, let me tell you what the heck that means. Blue zone is a term first officially coined in a paper published in 2004, in which researchers circled areas of Sardinia where there was an above-average number of people who were living longer than the average lifespan of those around them. That study found that extremely old people tended to be located in a particularly rural, mountainous area of Sardinia. And the lead researcher, Michel Poulin, started concurrently working with the American writer Dan Buettner to identify more of these clumps of older people in other parts of the world. Over time, they identified blue zones in Okinawa, Japan, the Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica, and Ikaria, Greece. Interesting, right? If people in these areas are more likely to live to, say, triple digits, despite the median lifespan nearby being in the 70s at best, it would behoove scientists to study what they're doing right so that we all might maximize our lifespan, much like Brian Johnson is trying to do. That's the guy who says he's never going to die, but he absolutely is. Click here to learn more about that grifter. It does seem like the research into aging and dying and how to stop it is an easy target for grifters because none of us really wants to age or die, despite those being the only two options available to us. But it's important to remember that there are good scientists doing good, interesting research on this topic. I really need you to remember that right now because I'm actually not sure that I've mentioned any good scientists doing good research on this topic yet. That said, allow me to continue. Buettner has really run with this idea of blue zones, arguing that the people in these areas share certain traits that we can use to inform our own lives. They don't share genetic markers, and they tend to be in more rural or isolated areas. So it's not just a case of winning the genetic lottery or having a lot of money on hand, winning the actual lottery. Instead, he says he's come up with the Power 9, which are 9 evidence-based common denominators among the world's centenarians, that's people who live over the age of 100, that are believed to slow this aging process. First, move around naturally, but don't actually work out. Next, have a sense of purpose in life. Third, relieve stress. Cool. Fourth, stop eating before you're full. Fifth, eat mostly plants. Sixth, drink booze, but moderately. Seventh, belong to a religion. Any religion. Eighth, have a family and keep them close. And finally, ninth, be part of a social circle that also has healthy habits. And that's it. That's what all these people who lived into their hundreds had in common. according to Dan Buettner. Now, if you didn't see a single red flag in any of those items, allow me to throw a few more out there that I noticed. First of all, Dan Buettner is not a scientist. He's a salesman, according to this profile from his alma mater, University of St. Thomas, where he graduated with Spanish and international business majors. That's probably why he thought to form a marketing company and trademark the phrase blue zones just before Poulan's study was published. Then he added a new blue zone, Loma Linda, California, where he said people were particularly long-lived because there are a lot of Seventh-day Adventists there. If you didn't know, not only do the Adventists go to church on Saturday instead of Sunday, but they also tend to be vegetarians who don't drink or smoke. Oh, also, Loma Linda is where Buettner founded his company. Then he started doing interviews, he made a TED Talk, and importantly, he started working to form these financially beneficial partnerships with various universities, governments, and healthcare companies. In 2020, Buettner hammered out a deal for Blue Zones, trademark, to be acquired by one of those companies, Adventist Health, the collection of hospitals owned by the Seventh-day Adventists. So Buettner definitely made bank off blue zones, both financially and professionally, and the Adventists now have an entire scientific organization that proves being an Adventist is so beneficial that you will literally live 10 years longer if you join. But do these conflicts of interest mean that the entire idea of blue zones is bunk? No, of course not. But this new Ig Nobel Prize winning study might. Yeah, did you forget where we started? That happens to me a lot. I'm sorry. You know I love a rabbit hole. Earlier I told you about those 9 traits centenarians share in those blue zones, according to Buettner. But one demographer, Dr. Saul Newman at Oxford University, is arguing that he failed to identify a few other interesting commonalities. In a paper that is still in preprint and thus has not been peer-reviewed, Newman found that in the United States, centenarians all seem to share the trait of not having a birth certificate. Further, in Italy, England, and France, which have more uniform vital registration, like birth certificates, remarkable longevity is instead predicted by poverty, low per capita incomes, shorter life expectancy, higher crime rates, worse health, higher deprivation, fewer 90-plus-year-olds, and residents in remote overseas and colonial territories. In England and France, higher old age poverty rates alone predict more than half of the regional variation in attaining a remarkable age. Only 18% of exhaustively validated supercentenarians, that's people over the age of 110, have a birth certificate, falling to 0% in the USA, and supercentenarian birth dates are concentrated on days divisible by 5, a pattern indicative of widespread fraud and error. Finally, the designated blue zones of Sardinia, Okinawa, and Ikaria corresponded to regions with low incomes, low literacy, high crime rate, and short life expectancy relative to their national average. As such, relative poverty and short lifespan constitute unexpected predictors of centenarian and supercentenarian status and support a primary role of fraud and error in generating remarkable human age records. So weird, right? Why would people be more likely to live past 100 in areas with a lower than average number of people over the age of 90? Why would people be more likely to live past 100 in places with great poverty when every other study shows that wealth is a top predictor of wellness? Why would Loma Linda, America's one great blue zone where people are promised the gift of living 10 years longer than average, actually have an unremarkable average lifespan according to the CDC? You're not a dum-dum. You already know. It's fraud. The answer is fraud and unintentional errors, but also fraud. Now, it's so important that I do need to say it again. This is a preprint. It has not yet been formally peer-reviewed, so no matter how convincing you find Newman's data, it is not smart or good science to assume that this is all bulletproof truth. But It's not Newman's first foray into this area. In 2017 and 2018, he published papers exposing statistical mistakes in other longevity research that effectively deleted their findings. And interestingly, Newman isn't just being a buzzkill for people who want to live longer, as the 2017 paper rebuts a previous study claiming to find a 125-year limit for humans, finding instead that the limit to human lifespan is historically flexible and increasing. I just wanted to double check that because I was curious if he has a bias. If he does, it seems to be a bias against what he sees as shady longevity research and not a bias against the idea that humans can live well into the triple digits. In a recent interview with phys.org, Newman brings up some relevant information. In Okinawa, the best predictor of where the centenarians are is where the halls of records were bombed by the Americans during the war. That's for two reasons. If the person dies, they stay on the books of some other national registry which hasn't confirmed their death. Or if they live, they go to an occupying government that doesn't speak their language, works on a different calendar, and screws up their age. According to the Greek minister that hands out the pensions, over 9,000 people over the age of 100 are dead and collecting a pension at the same time. In Italy, some 30,000 living pension recipients were found to be dead in 1997. Regions where people most often reach 100 to 110 years old are the ones where there's the most pressure to commit pension fraud, and they also have the worst records. For example, the best place to reach 105 in England is Tower Hamlets. It has more 105-year-olds than all of the rich places in England put together. It's closely followed by downtown Manchester, Liverpool, and Hull. Yet these places have the lowest frequency of 90-year-olds and are rated by the UK as the worst places to be an old person. While I can't say that this preprint fundamentally disproves the idea of blue zones, I do think it supports Newman's idea that the data in this field is rotten from the inside out. He points out in his paper that most of this research is confirmed based on documents, but if you imagine 100 centenarians in a room holding their birth documents and you have one hand their documents off to their sibling and leave, you'd have no idea which of the 100 is the fake centenarian because their documents would still show internal consistency, and even an interview with an oral history of their life would still match up. Newman ultimately calls for more research to develop biological testing that can accurately pinpoint a person's age, like through an examination of their epigenetic data. But until then, he wonders why the field of demography accepts such a high rate of ridiculous errors. When most Greek centenarians were found to not exist in the aftermath of the global financial crisis, he writes, their non-existence was published in newspapers, but was not mentioned or cited in the demographic literature. If equivalent rates of fake data were discovered in any other field, for example, if 82% of people in the UK biobank or 17% of galaxies detected by the Hubble telescope were revealed to be imaginary, a major scandal would ensue. In demography, however, such revelations seem to barely merit citation. It seems worth asking, therefore, why the recurrent discovery of high rates of non-random age errors have been ignored by the scientific community, given the fundamental importance of accurate age data to fields like medicine, gerontology, the social sciences, and epidemiology. That's such a great point. What do the people publishing in this field have to gain by ignoring these enormous inconsistencies in their data? Well, I guess that's just something for a future study to explore. In the meantime, you know what? I'm going to knock off work now and relax by watching something on Netflix. Maybe something science-y. That should be fun.
Is it okay if I... That is the promise of Blue Zones.
Okay, I'm actually going to conclude by being fair to Blue Zones TM, as they have responded to Newman on bluezones.com, just beneath the link to find Blue Zone's kitchen meals in a supermarket near you. I'm sorry, I swear I'm trying to be fair. They correctly highlight that his paper is a preprint that has not been accepted by any journals thus far, despite the fact that mainstream media sometimes does report it as being a published and thus a peer-reviewed study. They argue that their methods of age verification are actually accurate, and they point out that blue zones are places where people live longer than average and not necessarily just places with a higher than average number of centenarians, which is what the preprint focused on. They also have some researchers weigh in on specific points, and they take issue with some of his choices of statistical analysis and for failing to consider other options. For instance, he points out that the population of Okinawa are very unhealthy, but maybe that's just the youngest generation who have been more westernized, while the older generation continues to avoid alcohol and moderate their eating and do other healthy habits. As always, links to everything are in the transcript found at patreon.com/Rebecca. Please feel free to read it all and decide for yourself. I do think that there are certain habits with a lot of scientific evidence showing they will improve and maybe even extend our lifespans, like eating in moderation, moving your body, fostering a healthy, loving social circle. But I'm very skeptical of some of the other blue zone trademark claims. As I've discussed in the past, there's very little evidence to suggest that even moderate alcohol use is beneficial. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that alcohol in any amount is bad for you. And I am going to need a lot more evidence to believe that being part of a religion is universally beneficial, especially when you control for a healthy social circle and/or a supportive family. I suspect that all of those things provide a similar benefit. So I'm glad that Newman is pushing back on all of this, but I would love to see some peer-reviewed research that will better tease apart an incredibly complicated idea that seems to have gone to market long before the data is in. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you loved the video, please subscribe. And if you think the world could use more videos like this and you happen to have a few bucks laying around, head to patreon.com/Rebecca and join an awesome community of nerds like the people whose names you see on the screen right now. Thanks.